Howdy freeze dryers. Today we're ATVing in the mountains and we're doing a meal in a bag or a meal in a jar recipe. We're gonna do some cheeseburger soup. We're gonna do all that coming up. Howdy freeze dryers, it's that time of year when everyone's grilling outside and everyone's grilling cheeseburgers and steaks, but there's one problem with freeze-dried cheeseburgers. They're not very good if you want them on the go. So I have a good solution today. We all know that soup freeze dries really well, so today we're gonna try and make some cheeseburger soup that still gets all of the ingredients and all of that flavor and taste of a cheeseburger. And the greatest thing about cheeseburger soup, which is today's recipe, is most likely we all have all of these ingredients on hand in our freeze drying pantry. We can take all of these individual ingredients, put them all together and make a really easy recipe to throw together wherever you're at. And I just happen to have all of the ingredients for today's recipe on hand right now, so you don't even have to watch me freeze dry today. Here's what we need for today's recipe. We need some cooked ground beef crumbles. You can also use sausage if you do not want to use ground beef. Diced and sliced onions, some diced and sliced carrots. You can do these cooked or uncooked. I'm doing uncooked today. We also need some diced and sliced celery. Dried basil, that can either be the spice basil that you would take out of a container, or you can freeze dry the basil as well as some parsley flakes. That can be the same thing. We need some cloves of garlic. I think fresh cloves of garlic and then freeze dried are the best. I like to mince mine before I freeze dry it. Chicken broth or some beef broth. That can either be freeze dried in the broth form or it can be a broth cube, and then you can just throw it through a food processor and make it into a powder. Some peeled potatoes. I prefer actually either the shoestring type peeled potatoes or the very small cubed potatoes like you would see like in a frozen food section. Some freeze-dried cheese powder, a little milk powder, some salt and pepper to taste. Two optional ingredients. I like to do some sliced and diced jalapenos, and then I also like to do some sliced pickles, and then I crumble them up and add them to the top for the pickles on the cheeseburger. So because I have all of these ingredients on hand, I'm gonna switch the video order up a little bit today, and we're actually gonna put together the meal in a bag today, right now, and then we're actually going to go up into the mountains and rehydrate. I'll show you the rehydration formula, and we'll go from there. So before we go to rehydrate, I have to remind you to check out the freeze drying cookbook. This recipe, along with over 300 recipes now, are in that freeze drying cookbook. If you're a hard copy guy or gal, you can find this book at freezedryingsupplies.com. This is our hard copy of the freeze drying cookbook. This has our first 100 recipes in it. We also have a freeze drying handbook. We are working on a volume 2 of the cookbook, which will have the most updated recipes since all of these recipes. Also, please take a moment to subscribe to Live Life Simple if you have not already. We do primarily freeze drying on this channel. You can just click in the corner on the rocking chair, and after you're subscribed, you can click the bell. That will turn on your notifications. That will send you a notification every time we release a new video, Sundays at 8 a.m. And if you like the content we provide to you, the greatest compliment you can give to us is give us a thumbs up. All you have to do is just click on that thumbs up button. That'll let us know that you like the content. It'll also let YouTube know that you like the content. And even though we were not freeze drying in today's video, you can rest assured we used freeze dryers. We used Harvest Right freeze dryers. If you want to check these out, you can check out pricing and specs, and also their new models that they just released. Huge upgrades with those. If you do that, please use our affiliate link. It can be found down in the description. That lets Harvest Right know that we sent you there and gave you this information. If you have general questions about freeze drying or you're just curious, make sure you check out our freeze drying groups. Those can be found on Facebook and MeWe. It's Retired at 40's freeze drying group. A very helpful resource whether you're just getting into freeze drying or you are just curious about freeze drying. And one last thing before we rehydrate this thing, check out freezedryingsupplies.com. We sell freeze drying supplies that were specifically designed for freeze dryers, and our products are guaranteed to streamline your freeze drying process from start to finish. Before we go out on today's rehydration adventure, we're gonna bag this up. This could also go in a mason jar. We haven't done one of these individual freeze-dried ingredient recipes into a bag, so I figured we could do that today. Our first ingredient is going to be 3/4 of a cup of your protein of choice. So whether that's sausage crumbles or hamburger or whatever it's gonna be, 3/4 of a cup, and that's the freeze-dried measurement of your protein. Followed by 3 tablespoons of your sliced freeze-dried onions, 3 tablespoons of your sliced carrots. These could be already cooked or raw. I'm doing raw today. If you do raw, they will be a little bit different texture than if they're already cooked. I'll let you decide on whether or not you want to cut them into kind of dime size like these are, or if you want them dice them up even more, or if you want to cut them some way different. And we're also going to do 3 tablespoons of diced celery. Spices, we're gonna do 1/4 teaspoon of dried basil, 1/4 teaspoon of dried parsley, 1 teaspoon of garlic cloves, 1 bouillon cube, or the equivalent of what's meant for 16 ounces of soup or whatever or water or whatever. It may also help with a bouillon cube if you mince it into a powder or run it through a food processor. Now we're gonna go back with some individual ingredients. We're gonna do some cubed potatoes. You could also probably do minced or diced potatoes. You can see these are just kind of the ones that you would buy in the freezer section. I like these, they're good for a lot of different things. We've used them in breakfast scrambles quite a bit. And I use mine raw, but they will take a little bit longer rehydrating if they are raw. I like to add a little spice to mine. I'm gonna do 2 teaspoons of jalapenos, and depending on your spiciness level, you could do more than that too. And then next is the most important part for hamburger soup, and that is 1/2 cup of powdered cheese. You can run it through a food processor to get that nice powder. If you do like shredded, if you're freeze drying shredded cheese or something, you would definitely want the powder though, just for rehydration purposes. And we also want to help with this creaminess of this soup, so we're gonna do 1/4 cup of milk powder. And this last ingredient is totally optional, but I like to do some freeze-dried pickles and then just like a handful of them, and I like to crumble them up just to get that the pickle topping on your hamburger. So salt and pepper to taste, and then we're ready to go on our adventure. And that place is Slaughterhouse Gulch in Bailey, Colorado. We've been coming here for quite a few years now, and we actually built a couple structures just for fun when we were messing around one day. We're gonna see if we can find those again today, and we'll make that our rehydration point. All right, well, we didn't find our secret spot because they're doing some logging in the area. So we found another cool spot, which is actually perfect because it's super windy out today. So we're gonna heat up our kettle with some hot water. Okay, water's hot. All we need to rehydrate this is 3 cups of hot water. And we're gonna go just right into the bag with it. I'm gonna zip it up. And we're just gonna let that sit. This will take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to rehydrate. It does take a while just because of some of the ingredients, the potatoes, the carrots, the hamburger, things like that, but 10 to 15 minutes on that. So after your rehydration's done, you can either kind of massage the bag if you're gonna eat out of the bag, or if you're going in a container, then just give it a good stir, because all those spices kind of like to stick to the bottom as well as the meat. So time for a taste test. Make sure that you allow enough time for those potatoes as well as your meat. Everything else rehydrated really well. Great spice in this. All of our bellies are full now, and luckily we brought our hammock with us. So it's time for a siesta. Remember to live life simple. Catch you next week.